Last week was a long and momentous one in the presidency of Barack Obama. On Monday, he began a bombing campaign with members of an international coalition against ISIS and other terrorist targets in Syria, while continuing airstrikes in northern Iraq. On Wednesday, he addressed the United Nations and laid out his case in the strongest terms for international action against Muslim extremists. By Thursday, his anti-ISIS coalition had grown to more than 60 members, ranging from the Saudis, Jordanians, Emiratis, and Europeans who flew missions, to the Irish and the Swedes who wrote checks, to the Bulgarians and the Egyptians who wished us well.
Mr. President.
On Friday, he was back in the White House, where he met us in the diplomatic reception room for a conversation that ranged from terror networks to the American economy.
A lot of things going on in the world right now, a lot of them bad. You run into people on the street and they say the world is falling apart. You got Syria, you've got Iraq, you've got Ukraine, you've got Ebola.
Right.
Is this the most difficult period of your presidency, the biggest challenge of your presidency, this period we're in right now?
It's a significant period, but if you think about what I walked into when I came into office, we had not only 2 wars still active, but we also had a world financial system that was becoming unraveling, and we were losing 800,000 jobs a month. So, we've had challenges before, and we've overcome them. That's not to downplay the serious challenges that we do face right now, mostly internationally.
You spent most of your time in office trying to get the United States out of military entanglements.
Yeah.
And last year at the United Nations, you noted that we were out of Iraq and unwinding our position in Afghanistan.
Right.
And this year, and in your State of the Union message, you said, I quote, America must move off a permanent war footing.
Right.
But it feels once again like we are on one.
Well, I distinguish, Steve, between counterterrorism and the sort of occupying armies that characterized the Iraq and Afghan war. That's very different from us having 150,000 troops in Iraq on the ground, or 60,000 in Afghanistan.
Are you saying that this is not really a war?
Well, what I'm saying is that we are assisting Iraq in a very real battle that's taking place on their soil with their troops, but we are providing air support, and it is in our interest to do that because ISIL represents sort of a hybrid of not just a terrorist network, but one with territorial ambitions and some of the strategy and tactics of an army. This is not America against ISIL. This is America leading the international community to assist a country with whom we have a security partnership with to make sure that they are able to take care of their business.
2 years ago in the White House, in this building, you told me you talked about Al-Qaeda being decimated.
Right.
2 years later, you've got Al-Qaeda affiliates and Al-Qaeda offshoots controlling huge chunks of both Iraq and Syria. And you have militant militias, Islamic radical militias, in control of Libya.
Yeah. If you'll recall, Steve, you had a international network in Al-Qaeda between Afghanistan and Pakistan, headed by bin Laden. And that structure we have rendered ineffective. But what I also said, and this was 2 years ago and a year ago, is that you have regional groups with regional ambitions and territorial ambitions. And what also has not changed is the kind of violent, ideologically driven extremism that has taken root in too much of the Muslim world. This week, in my speech to the United Nations General Assembly, I made very clear, we are not at war against Islam. Islam is a religion that preaches peace, and the overwhelming majority of Muslims are peaceful. But in the Muslim world right now, there is a cancer that has grown for too long that suggests that it is acceptable to kill innocent people who worship a different God. And that kind of extremism, unfortunately, means that we're going to see for some time the possibility that in a whole bunch of different countries, radical groups may spring up, particularly in countries that are still relatively fragile, where you have sectarian tensions, where you don't have a strong state security apparatus. And that's why what we have to do is, rather than play whack-a-mole and send U.S. troops wherever this occurs, we have to build strong partnerships. We have to get the international community to recognize this is a problem. We've got to get Arab and Muslim leaders to say very clearly, these folks do not represent us, they do not represent Islam, and to speak out forcefully against them.
But I understand all the caveats about these regional groups.
Yeah.
But this is an army of 40,000 people, according to some of the military estimates I heard the other day. Very well trained, very motivated.
Yeah. Well, part of
how did this get? How did they end up where they are in control of so much territory?
Yeah.
Was that a complete surprise to you?
Well, I think our head of the intelligence community, Jim Clapper, has acknowledged that I think they underestimated what had been taking place in Syria.
I mean, he didn't just say that we underestimated ISIL. He said we overestimated the ability and the will of our allies, the Iraqi army, to fight.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And
these are the people that we are now expecting to carry on the fight.
Well, here's what happened in Iraq. When we left, we had left them a democracy that was intact, a military that was well equipped, and the ability then to chart their own course. And that opportunity was squandered over the course of 5 years or so because the Prime Minister, Maliki, was much more interested in consolidating his Shia base and very suspicious of the Sunnis and the Kurds, who make up the other 2/3 of the country. So what you did not see was a government that had built a sense of national unity. And if you don't have...
Or an army.
Or an army that feels committed to the nation as opposed to a particular sect. Now the good news is that the new Prime Minister, Abadi, who I met with this week, so far at least, has sent all the right signals. And that's why it goes back to what I said before, Steve. We can't do this for them. We cannot do this for them because it's not just a military problem, it is a political problem. Mm-hmm. And if we make the mistake of simply sending U.S. troops back in, we can maintain peace for a while. But unless there is a change in how not just Iraq, but countries like Syria and some of the other countries in the region think about what political accommodation means. Think about what tolerance means.
And do you think we can teach them that?
Well, I think this is going to be a generational challenge. I don't think that this is something that's going to happen overnight. They have now created an environment in which young men are more concerned whether they're Shia or Sunni rather than whether they are getting a good education or whether they are able to have a good job. Many of them are poor. Many of them are illiterate and are therefore more subject to these kinds of ideological appeals. And the beginning of a solution for the entire Middle East is going to be a transformation in how these countries teach their youth. What our military operations can do is to just check and roll back these networks as they appear and make sure that the time and space is provided for a new way of doing things to begin to take root. But it's going to take some time. And in the meantime, what I can... You're
saying buy them time so they can get their act together.
But in the meantime, it's not just buy them time, it's also making sure that Americans are protected, that our allies are protected.
You've acknowledged, or you said that the Iraqi government, the new Iraqi government, is making great progress, or making some progress.
I wouldn't say great yet.
Okay. They have a new prime minister, they have a new administration.
Right.
What it's not produced is any sort of a enthusiasm, or much enthusiasm on the part of the disaffected Sunni majority.
It's going to take time.
They're not lining up to go and join the Iraqi army.
Well, look, mistrust has been built up over time. his instincts are right. Whether he can pull it off is something that is going to be a great challenge, and we got to give him all the support that we can in this process. The good news is that you have an unprecedented international coalition that is serious about this. Not only do we have Arab states participating in airstrikes for the first time in a very long time and being very serious about their commitment, but you've got the United Kingdom, you've got France, Belgium.
I think everybody applauds the efforts that you've made and the size of the coalition that has been assembled. But most of them are contributing money or training or policing the borders, not getting particularly close to the contact. It looks like, once again, we are leading the operation. We are carrying most of the weight.
Steve, that's always the case. That's always the case. America leads. We are the indispensable nation. We have capacity no one else has. Our military is the best in the history of the world. And when trouble comes up anywhere in the world, they don't call Beijing, they don't call Moscow, they call us. That's the deal.
I mean, it looks like we are doing 90%.
Steve, there is not an issue. When there's a typhoon in the Philippines, take a look at who's helping the Philippines deal with that situation. When there's an earthquake in Haiti, take a look at who's leading the charge, making sure Haiti can rebuild. That's how we go. That's how we roll, and that's what makes us America.
But you've said that we are not going to be the Shiite Air Force. We're not going to be the Kurdistan Air Force. We're not going to be the Iraqi Air Force.
Right.
But in effect, with the Allies, that's what we have become. We have become the Iraqi Air Force.
With the Allies, with their ground troops, and if we do our job right and the Iraqis fight, then over time our role can slow down and taper off, and their role reasserts itself. But all that depends, Steve, and nobody's clearer than I am about this, that the Iraqis have to be willing to fight, and they have to be willing to fight in a non-sectarian way, Shia, Sunni, and Kurd alongside each other against this cancer in their midst.
What happens if the Iraqis don't fight or can't fight?
Well,
what's the end game?
I'm not going to speculate on failure at the moment. We're just getting started. Let's see how they do. I think that right now we've got a campaign plan that has a strong chance for success in Iraq. I think Syria is a more challenging situation.
Syria is more challenging because the U.S. has few viable allies on the ground there. The regime of Bashar al-Assad is fighting ISIS, but the U.S. wants Assad deposed for committing horrific crimes against his own people. And other opposition groups, like the al-Nusra Front and a terrorist cell called Khorasan, which was plotting attacks against Europe and the U.S., are both affiliated with al-Qaeda. The coalition is hoping to train 5,000 moderate Syrian fighters in Saudi Arabia.
Is there a moderate Syrian opposition?
There is, but right now it doesn't control much territory. It has been squeezed between ISIL on the one hand and the Assad regime on the other.
These are the people that you said, the farmers, the doctors, the pharmacists, who stood no chance of overthrowing the government.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, 2 years ago, that was absolutely true. This is in response to the mythology that's evolved, that somehow if we had given those folks some guns 2.5 years ago, that Syria would be fine. And the point that I made then, which is absolutely true, is that for us to just start arming inexperienced fighters who we hadn't vetted, so we didn't know and couldn't sort out very well who's potentially ISIL or al-Nusra member and who is somebody that we're going to work with. For us to just go blind on that would have been counterproductive and would not have helped the situation, but also would have committed us to a much more significant role inside of Syria.
You said that we need to get rid of Assad.
Yeah.
And while we're saying we have to get rid of Assad, we are also bombing and trying to take out some of his most threatening opponents.
Yeah.
And that the beneficiary of this is Assad.
I recognize the contradiction in a contradictory land and a contradictory circumstance. We are not going to stabilize Syria under the rule of Assad, because the Sunni areas inside of Syria view Assad as having carried out terrible atrocities. The world has seen them. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. Millions have been displaced. So for a long-term political settlement, for Syria to remain unified, it is not possible that Assad presides over that entire process. On the other hand, in terms of immediate threats to the United States, ISIL, Khorasan Group, those folks could kill Americans.
They're more important than Assad at this point. That's what you're saying.
What I'm saying is that they're all connected, but there is a more immediate concern that has to be dealt with.
You know, you've said no American boots on the ground, no combat troops on the ground. We've got 1,600 troops there.
We do.
Some of them are going to be out embedded with Iraqi units.
Yeah. Well, they're in harm's way in the sense that anytime you're in a war theater, it's dangerous. So I don't want to downplay the fact that they're in a war environment and there are hostile forces on the other side.
And they're participating in combat operations.
Well, there is a difference between them advising and assisting Iraqis who are fighting versus a situation in which we got our Marines and our soldiers out there taking shots and shooting back.
When we come back, President Obama looks at America's troubled relationship with Russia, his own economic record, and his party's prospects in the midterm elections. The air war against ISIS terrorists in Syria and Iraq isn't the only international crisis facing President Obama. There is the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, to which he has committed up to 3,000 U.S. troops and mobilized an air transport system to help contain the epidemic, which threatens to infect 1.4 million people by early next year. Then there's the continuing confrontation with Russia over its incursions into Ukraine. It's created a face-off with Russian President Vladimir Putin that sent relations between the United States and Russia into a state of tension not seen in decades.
We have a very complicated situation going on right now between NATO and Russia.
Yeah.
What's your relationship with President Putin? Do you have a personal relationship?
Well, I've always had a business-like relationship with him, and it's blunt and it's firm. And what I've said from the outset is that Russian aggression, violating the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a smaller, weaker country, violates international norms and is contrary to all the progress that's been made in creating a peaceful and prosperous Europe after World War II and then after the Cold War period. And you know, the good news is, because of American leadership, we have been able to impose a cost on Mr. Putin. We've put together sanctions that have hurt their economy, that have given them pause. We now are in a situation in which a ceasefire has been brokered. It is still tentative between the Ukrainian separatists, Russia, and Ukraine. There was an agreement announced today that in fact, Russian gas would still be sold to Ukraine so that they're not going to freeze this winter. There is the possibility of a political solution. None of that would have happened, though, unless we took a firm line that what Russia did was wrong, and then still leave them the possibility of taking a different path. And that's always been my relationship with Putin and the Russian people. But what I've said to them is, you are a great country with incredible talent and incredible traditions. And if you focus on your engineering talent and your mathematical talents and growing your economy, then by definition Russia is going to be a great power in this world.
Do you think there's any chance of a military confrontation between NATO and Russia in Ukraine?
No, I don't think there's going to be a military confrontation between NATO and Russia, although we have worked very hard to reassure our NATO allies on the front lines, including some smaller Baltic states like Estonia, where I visited before the NATO summit in Wales, that Article 5 of the NATO treaty means what it says. We come to the aid and assistance, so if you mess with the NATO country, then there will be a military confrontation. And Putin understands that. But I do think that there is still the possibility of Russia moving in a better direction. Unfortunately, what's happened is that Putin, who I think was caught off guard initially with the protests inside of Ukraine and improvised to try to figure out how he was going to keep Ukraine in his orbit, has used state propaganda inside of Russia to whip up nationalist sentiment. It's been good for his poll numbers. It's been very bad for his economy, and it's bad for Russia's future. And part of what I've said to him privately and what I've said publicly is, that's a blind alley for you. Go back to trying to abide by international norms, and it'll be better for the Russian people. It'll certainly be better for Europe. We're not looking for confrontation, but we're going to be very firm about the principles at stake.
All of this is going on less than 6 weeks before midterm congressional elections that promise to be in part a referendum on his leadership. Right now, public opinion polls show a majority of Americans disapprove of his handling of foreign policy and the economy.
You've got midterm elections coming up. Are you going to get shellacked?
Well,
are you optimistic? What are the issues, and what are you going to tell the American people?
Here's what I'm going to tell the American people. When I came into office, our economy was in crisis. We had unemployment up at 10%. It's now down to 6.1. We've had the longest run of uninterrupted private sector job growth in our history. We have seen deficits cut by more than half. Corporate balance sheets are probably the best they've been in the last several decades. We are producing more energy than we have before. We are producing more clean energy than we ever have before. I can put my record against any leader around the world in terms of digging ourselves out of a terrible, almost unprecedented financial crisis. Ronald Reagan used to ask the question, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? In this case, are you better off than you were in 6? And the answer is, the country is definitely better off than we were when I came into office. But
do you think people feel it?
They don't feel it. And the reason they don't feel it is because incomes and wages are not going up. There's solutions to that. If we raise the minimum wage, if we make sure women are getting paid the same as men for doing the same work, if we are rebuilding our infrastructure, if we're doing more to invest in job training so people are able to get the jobs that are out there right now, because manufacturing's coming back to this country. Not just the auto industry that we saved, but you're starting to see reinvestment here in the United States. Businesses around the world are saying for the first time in a long time, the place to invest isn't China, it's the United States.
Do you think you can hold the Senate?
Yes. I do.
Do you think you can sell this? What we've been talking about. Do you think you can convince people that they're doing fine economically?
Hopefully they get a chance to hear the argument, because all I'm doing is presenting the facts.
By now you've probably heard of Alibaba, the Chinese internet giant that's able to reach millions upon millions of previously unreachable Chinese consumers. The company went public this month on the New York Stock Exchange and became one of the most valuable in the world. And Alibaba is just getting started. Everything about the Alibaba story is unconventional, beginning with its founder, Jack Ma, who gained global celebrity status these past 10 days, as his image became ubiquitous on business news channels and media outlets across America. We got to know Jack Ma before the onslaught, beginning over a year ago in China, where he talked with us about his relationship with the Chinese government and his unorthodox business philosophy, which surprisingly gives shareholders almost no say over how he runs the company.
If you want to invest in us, we believe customer number one, employee number two, shareholder number three. If they don't want to buy it, that's fine. If they regret, they can sell us.
In the U.S., the shareholder is usually first.
Yeah, and I think they were wrong. The shareholder, good, I respect them, but they're the third, because if you take care of the customer, take care of the employees, shareholder will be taken care of.
Ma's unconventional view didn't stop Wall Street from pouring $25 billion into his company, now listed on the New York Stock Exchange as Alibaba. It's an internet shopping behemoth, a collection of online marketplaces where buyers and sellers connect to do business. Most of the company's money comes from advertising and small transaction fees. On its most popular website, Taobao, users talk to each other, barter, and engage in a way that doesn't happen on American e-commerce websites. And Alibaba says there are close to 1 billion products for sale.
If I'm buying a house, I can do everything from find an architect to buying doorknobs to furnishing the entire thing from start to finish. What else?
You can buy anything, as long as it's legal. Anything.
5, 6 years ago, you weren't even making a profit. In fact, in 2002, you made $1 in profit. And today you make how much?
Billions?
Billions of dollars.
It's now the biggest e-commerce firm in the world, dwarfing the combined sales of Amazon and eBay. And Alibaba has helped create hundreds of millions of internet consumers, a whole new social class in communist China, people who never had access to modern commerce before Jack Ma came along.
And now you have 500 million registered users.
Yes. It's only like a little bit more than 40% of China population, and we need more. We have over 100 million people visiting the site, shopping every day coming, and it's just a beginning.
When Jack Ma dreamed up Alibaba in 1999, the online world looked nothing like it does today. The most popular search engine was Yahoo, not Google. There were no iPods, iPhones, or iPads. Only 4 out of 10 American homes had internet connections. And the World Wide Web barely reached all the way to China, where retail stores were rare outside the big cities. For most of the country, there was no such thing as package delivery or credit cards. The only way to buy anything was face-to-face and in cash.
When we started the e-commerce, nobody believed that China would have e-commerce, because people believe on the guanxi, face-to-face, and all kinds of network in traditional ways. There's no trust system in China.
He had to overcome centuries of tradition by showing Chinese buyers and sellers that they could trust Alibaba with their money in this new virtual world. He did it by guaranteeing the transactions and creating his own payment system, an escrow account where Alibaba holds the buyer's money until the goods are delivered.
Every day we finish more than 30 million transactions. And that means that you are buying things from somebody you have never seen. You are giving products to the person you have never met. And there are some guys you never know that he's going to take your products to that place, to that person. I want to tell the people that the trust is there.
Because it's all about trust.
It's all about the trust.
Now anyone, rich or poor, with access to the internet and something to sell, can connect with hundreds of millions of potential customers on one of Ma's websites. Ordinary people in China who never had a way to do business with each other before today have a stake in the online world. That idea was revolutionary. It created millions of jobs and made Jack Ma a hero to millions of Chinese.
This is your old stomping ground, right?
Yep.
We met Jack Ma in Hangzhou, an ancient city in southeastern China famous for its beauty. This is where he grew up poor in the 1960s, during the chaos of Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, when the country was cut off from the West. Then in 1972, Richard Nixon came to his hometown. It was the first visit by a U.S. president to communist China, and the city became a mecca for foreign tourists. Through them, 12-year-old Jack got his first glimpse of a world beyond China.
The name Jack was given by an American tourist.
He told us how he taught himself English, walking up to foreigners and offering free tours in exchange for free lessons. Unlike many successful Chinese entrepreneurs, Jack Ma never studied in the U.S. He also had no status, money, or connections. The only other way to get ahead in China was education, and he failed the college entrance exam twice.
My parents do not want me to take examinations again.
Because they didn't want you to fail again?
Yeah, they believe I will fail again.
How did that affect you?
That's a good question. Nobody asked me how that affected me. That really affected me a lot. I failed for the first time, and then I asked for looking for jobs. I went to interview jobs for about 10, 15 times, and all rejected by people.
Why did everyone reject you?
I was not the standard that normal people like.
Because you were small?
I was small.
And skinny?
Skinny, not handsome, and terrible. The way I talk, and they probably just don't like it.
Ma made it into college on his third try and became an English teacher. With no computing or engineering background, he's an unlikely tech titan, but he says he was captivated by the internet from the moment he first saw it in 1995, when he came to the U.S. as a translator.
I never touched keyboard before. I never using computer before, and I say, what is internet? He said, Jack, search whatever you want on the internet. I said, how can I search? What does search mean? He said, just a type. I said, I don't want to type. Computer is so expensive in China, I don't want to destroy it. He said, it's not a bomb, just a type. So I typed the first word called beer. At that time, very slow. Come out the American beer, Japan beer, and the German beer, but no China beer. So I was curious, and it was type China. No China, no data. Came back to Hangzhou with $1 in my pocket, scared, worried, and I came back and I said, I want to do something called internet.
His first two ventures failed. 4 years later, he convinced some friends and former students, most of whom had never used the internet, to invest in him and his vision for Alibaba. With just over $50,000 in seed money, the company was born. Today, it's valued at $231 billion and is headquartered in Hangzhou on a sprawling state-of-the-art campus that rivals any in Silicon Valley. Ma's personal fortune makes him the richest man in China and one of the most influential. It's impossible to run a business on Alibaba's scale without official blessing.
You were quoted saying, when you have millions of small companies using your site and billions of dollars in transactions every day, the government cares.
Yeah.
So what do they care about?
They care that I can stabilize the country. I told the government, if people have no jobs, you are in trouble. Government will be in trouble. My job is to help more people have jobs.
So usually when people succeed in China, they either have connections, political connections, or they come from a wealthy family. You had neither.
No.
And you've done this without interference from the government?
Well, I never got 1 cent from government. I never get 1 cent from China banks. So I'm very independent.
That was true when Alibaba began, and most of its capital still comes from abroad. But more recently, some of its smaller investors have included institutions with ties to China's ruling elite. Alibaba has also benefited from Chinese government policies that make it difficult for foreign competitors to operate there. Ma explained how he walks a fine line with Beijing.
I have a very strict talk to my team. So never ever do business with government. Don't love them, don't marry them. So we never do projects for government. If they come to us and say, Jack, can you help with this? Good, I will introduce friends to you who are interested in doing that. Or if you wanted me to do it, I do it free for you. Just one, next time don't come to me again. So because of that, we keep very good love relationship with the government.
When we pressed Ma, he acknowledged there are times he has to bow to Chinese authorities, though he was surprisingly frank about a subject that's also sensitive among U.S. internet companies, including Google, Facebook, and Yahoo.
You gather more information on Chinese citizens than anyone else in the country.
You mean me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So when the Chinese government comes knocking on your door asking for that information, how do you handle that? What do you do?
Okay. We have a very strict process working with the government. If they want to do it, it's related with the national security, we work together. Any country, any citizen, anywhere, you have to work. I believe Google has to do. If it's the national security of the USA, Facebook has to do it, Alibaba will definitely have to do it.
What worries some investors is the possibility that China could take control of the company and all of its assets at any time. And then there's Alibaba's unusual corporate structure, which puts all the power in the hands of Jack Ma and a small group of insiders.
First of all, I want you to put on this.
But there's another side of him that's little known outside of China, where he's a celebrity. A cult of Ma reaches across the country and inspires almost fanatical loyalty among his employees and their families, who record his speeches and quote his sayings. Here he's dressed as a punk rocker, performing for an enthusiastic audience of 20,000 Alibaba workers at a company anniversary celebration.
You are so beautiful to me.
The Chairman Ma show is now playing here in the U.S., bringing with it the potential of hundreds of millions of Chinese consumers for products made in America.
So this is not Jack Ma's American invasion. This is not Google, Amazon, eBay, be afraid.
We come to help, not invade. For example, bring the U.S. small business come to China. This is something that we can do better because we have 100 million buyers today, every day. We don't know, 3 years, 300 million?
Magic tricks, mass employee weddings, karaoke moments. You've never seen an executive like this. Go to 60minutesovertime.com.
Now, an update on the Africa Mercy hospital ship Scott Pelley first reported on last year. The Africa Mercy has been bringing 21st century medical care to some of the world's poorest countries along the west coast of Africa.
She can be described in the usual dimensions of a ship, 500 feet in length, 8 decks, a crew of 450. Or you can reckon Africa Mercy as a hospital, 90 nurses, 15 doctors, 78 beds, and 6 operating rooms. The idea for all of this set sail back in 1978 when Don Stevens of Texas started a charity that he calls Mercy Ships.
So how did you find this ship?
We found her in Denmark. She was a rail ferry.
Africa Mercy replaced 3 earlier vessels, and Stevens says that over 35 years, hundreds of thousands of patients have been aboard his ships.
But even the Africa Mercy wasn't equipped to deal with the Ebola epidemic this summer. The outbreak kept the world's largest civilian hospital ship in port in the Canary Islands and forced its largely volunteer crew of doctors and nurses to cancel scheduled surgical calls in Guinea, where Ebola started. Instead, it is now en route around the Cape of Good Hope, bound for patients on the island nation of Madagascar, off the coast of East Africa. I'm Bill Whitaker. We'll be back next week with another edition of 60 Minutes.